Hello everyone, Rise of the Phoenix here, and welcome to the first video in my beginner's guide to Europa Universalis 4. The goal of these videos is for me to help you, as a new or inexperienced EU4 player, start ending your games as the #1 great power in the world. In this video, we're going to go over choosing a good nation for a new player, as well as the UI elements. So as a new player, I would highly recommend starting in Europe. The reason for this is that there are many powerful countries that start in Europe with access to lucrative trade nodes, so you won't have to worry about managing your money too much, and you will be able to embrace institutions relatively quickly. There are very powerful nations in India and Asia, but since institutions spread there very slowly, especially in the early game, you have to do some weird things with your monarch points because you don't really want to be taking technology when you have a 150% penalty to the cost. But we'll talk about that a bit later. I'm the type of player who in games, I love playing the underdogs, I love playing on hard difficulties, I love taking on challenges. I want to feel really pushed to my limits while playing. And one of the hardest things for me in EU4 was taking a step back and forcing myself, at least in my first few games, to play a nation that starts off very powerful. My first games in EU4, I tended to play Byzantium because I was like, oh, I'm this little nation, I get to take on the Ottomans, it's going to be super hard and super fun. And I just lost over and over and over. And while losing is a good way to learn things, if you lose too badly, you never have a chance to learn things. So with that being said, Paradox has given new players 3 good options for empires to start as: the Ottomans, Castile, and Portugal. Now, if you just want to get good at fighting wars, you could play the Ottomans. However, they start so powerful and have so many advantages that you can really make a ton of mistakes and still be successful. You have a ton of much weaker nations to pick on around you, so you can pick up a lot of land early on and just keep steamrolling from there. If this is your absolute first time playing the game, the Ottomans might be a good choice, or if you're just not very familiar with grand strategy or 4X type games, autos are probably a good choice. You should be successful with them. You'll have a good time because you get to fight a lot and you'll learn some things along the way. I would actually recommend shying away from Portugal unless you want to learn or practice colonization. Portugal doesn't start as very powerful, and they're next to Castile, which is much more powerful, and Morocco, which is about as powerful, but they're actually very hard to fight an offensive war on Morocco due to the alliances they tend to have and due to fighting in the desert, having to transport your troops, all kinds of things like that. However, Portugal, since they start with this island over here, is probably the best nation for a new player to learn colonization as. The benefit of colonization is that you get access to all of North and South America earlier than any other European power, and you can have some fun building up colonies, making a ton of money, but you tend to be picking on significantly weaker nations as far as warfare goes. Your army will be so much more advanced than the natives that you can basically do whatever you want and win. You can make the biggest tactical errors ever, and your army's still just going to crush them. So if you do choose to play for Portugal and colonize, keep in mind you're probably not going to learn very much about the military aspect of the game, and the first 100 years or so are going to be pretty boring because you're just going to kind of wait around until you're able to pick up the ideas to colonize the new world. So I think in this playthrough we'll play as Castile. It's also the nation that the tutorial is played through, and I would recommend doing the tutorial. Another good choice, I think, for new players is England. The reason being is You have some weaker nations that you can pick on around you, so that you can pick up the entire United Kingdom area of the map. And from there, you can either fight in Europe, or go up around the Baltic, or you can choose to colonize and pick up the North American eastern coast and expand from there. So England has a lot of options. The one thing I would tell you to be careful with is if and when it comes time to fight France, France is extremely powerful in this game. So if you lose your first war to them, don't worry about it too much. Just rebuild and try again. The other advantage of England is that since the majority of your land is going to be on your set of islands, as long as you maintain a strong naval presence, it's very unlikely that the heart of your empire is going to get invaded by the AI. So this allows you to make some pretty massive blunders in Europe militarily, and you're still going to be able to rebuild and be safe, because it's likely that you will never have to actually truly defend any of this. There are a number of scenarios that you can pick from, and this is just going to move you to a different spot of the map. The actual gameplay, as far as I'm aware, is exactly the same, but if we choose like Empires of the Sands, it wants you to play African nations. First Nations is over in the New World, and East takes you to Asia. But as I said, we are going to start as Castile, and I'm going to leave it on normal mode. I do have this just on the normal difficulty because we're going to be taking our time and going through things. Normal mode I would recommend for new players. That way, if you make a huge mistake and ruin everything, you are able to go back and reload without restarting the game. Normally I do play my games on Iron Man mode. That way, I have to be very careful with what I'm doing and making proper decisions. And it's just more fun to me, but you should play on whatever mode you find to be most enjoyable. So, while we're loading in here, I do want to point out there are 3 ranks of empires in this game. There's Duchy, Kingdom, and Empire. Those basically determine how many diplomats and stuff you get, as well as a few other more advanced things that we'll get into a bit later. We will be starting as a kingdom, since we are Castile. You get this nice overview here that kind of gives you a little brief history and maybe a little bit of guidance, tells you about your religion. This can be very important because religions can have a pretty big impact on how you play the game. That'll be a topic probably for its own video. Government, we start as a monarchy. This means our ruler is going to rule until he dies or we kick him out, and kicking him out can have some pretty sharp penalties. Anytime our ruler dies, we're going to lose stability. We'll go over that sort of stuff in a later video as well. I don't want this video to get too bloated. And it gives us a little bit about our environment. So, whatever nation you pick, you can read through all of that. I'm not going to take the time to read everything here. So we're going to go ahead and close this. And let's get into the UI. So there is a ton of information that is part of EU4 and being successful. And one of the things I was overwhelmed with as a new player is like, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff everywhere. There's all these map modes. What do they mean? How do I use them? Because ultimately, with a game like this, you need to take all the information that you have access to, filter through what's important, what's not important, and then use that information to make good decisions going forward into the game. Anytime you have incomplete information or read things improperly, you're liable to make big blunders that will cost you a decade or two to rebuild, or even worse, losing the game. So we're going to go through this area first. I'll try not to move the map. We have our basic economic breakdown, how much money we have in the treasury, how much money we're making each month, and it gives you a little overview of what your income versus expenses are. As a new player, this is definitely a reason I recommend a relatively powerful nation. The larger countries tend to have better economies. and you want to have that flexibility as a new player if you need to merc up to win a war, or if you need to build some buildings to increase your income. Gold, let's see how I want to put this. It's an important resource, but as you get more experienced with the game, you're going to be more comfortable doing things like debasing your currency, taking out loans until your economy grows and then you can easily repay them and whatnot. But as a new player, you don't really want to be getting into that kind of stuff. You just want to focus on the basics. So it's important that you pick a nation that has a strong economy so you don't have to worry about the advanced areas of economic management. Number 2 here is our manpower. And I'm going to go like more in depth probably in the next video about each of these resources. I just want you guys to know where they're found. Manpower is basically a gauge of how many dudes you have that can go and fight for you. It's replenished per month. This is a breakdown on how much you have right now, how much you're gaining each month, and it'll show you up here if your armies have taken casualties, you'll be able to see how many are going to be reinforced. Sailors is just like manpower, but it's for your navy. And sailors only come from coastal provinces, whereas manpower comes from all provinces. Stability, very important mechanic in my opinion. It goes from -3 all the way up to +3. The higher your stability, the better, generally speaking. I can't think of any reason why negative stability would be better than +3. Maybe there's some niche scenario out there. Basically, having positive stability boosts the effectiveness of pretty much your whole kingdom. Most importantly for a new player is higher stability is going to reduce the number of rebels you get. And as you get more experienced, crushing rebels becomes a time-consuming, annoying task, but it's not particularly like something you have to worry about. But you're going to get events that can improve or decrease stability. You can also spend monarch points to improve your stability, which we'll go over that a bit later. Corruption is basically a measure of how corrupt your government is. There's a number of factors that can contribute to that. We'll go over those in my video, probably the next video I make. I think I'll talk about all the resources and their uses. Basically, the simplest way to put it is you can spend money to root out corruption over time. It can be a very costly endeavor, but you don't want to have high corruption if you can help it. So in the economy tab here, which we'll go over this all in a minute, you can set this slider to root out or not root out corruption. But generally you want to root it out unless you know what you're doing. Prestige is like how awesome your nation is, I guess, how well known your nation is to other nations. You can see that it has a number of impacts. Generally, they're relatively minor, like 0.8% morale, but every little bit adds up, especially in this game when you can stack morale from prestige, morale from army tradition, and all these other types of things. I wouldn't worry about it too much as a new player. We'll go over how to gain or lose it in the video about the resources themselves, but higher the number, the better. It can also be negative. Legitimacy is how much your people view your ruler as the legitimate ruler of the nation. It does have a number of effects, as you can see right here, effects from your current legitimacy. Not the most important thing in my opinion. Basically, if you have low legitimacy, you're going to get more rebels, which can be annoying, but just try not to have it below like 50 if you can help it, but overall I wouldn't stress about legitimacy too much. Power projection is actually quite important in my opinion. It's basically a measure of how well your country is using its power to influence the rest of the world around you, really in your nearby area. The main way of gaining power projection is by beating up whoever you set as your rival. The reason I think it's important is these two effects down here. If you have at least 25 power projection, you can have +1 leader without upkeep. That's important because as the game drags on, you're gonna want to have more and more armies running around, And during war, you pretty much never want to have a leaderless army engaging in combat. And we'll go over that in the combat mechanics, why that is. More importantly, in my opinion, if you have at least 50 power projection, you gain +1 of each monarch power per month. It's my personal belief that monarch points, monarch mana, whatever you want to call them, that's the most important resource in the game, in my opinion. So keeping above 50 power projection is extremely useful because there aren't that many ways of getting more points per month, and that's one of them. Down there it shows how to gain power projection, and it just says right there, triumph over your rivals. So now we have our agents, whatever you want to call them. We get merchants, colonists, diplomats, and missionaries. Merchants you assign to trade nodes. Trade is probably going to be at least one video of its own, but they make you money, and money can be useful. Colonists are what you send to any uncolonized area. I don't think we can see any yet. As the world gets explored, you'll be able to see uncolonized territory. And just remember from the very beginning how basically the entire new world is uncolonized. So they go and set up your colonies, gather colonists there, and once you reach 1,000 colonists, your colony becomes an actual province and starts granting you benefits like money and development and whatnot. Diplomats are very important, probably the most important agent that you have. Diplomats can be used to improve relations with countries, offer alliances, royal marriages, spy on enemy countries, support rebels, sabotage people's reputations. I mean, you can just see if I click here just how many different actions in this game use diplomats. So they are very, very important. You definitely want to keep your diplomats working at all times. And I'll probably make a short video about diplomacy, kind of going over all of these different options outside the scope of this video. Missionaries are the dudes you send to convert provinces to your religion. So if we open up here and we look at our religion, we are Catholic. It is possible to convert your country to a new religion, and later on in the game, events are going to pop up where you can become Reformed or Protestant or whatnot. And basically what happens is, let's say we want to conquer Granada. If we look at our province overview, they are Sunni. We are Catholic. We're going to want to convert them to Catholic. It gives us less unrest in those provinces since they're now our country's religion. And as a Catholic, it's going to give us papal influence, which we can use for various things like becoming the Pope, or more importantly, you can gain stability, gain tax modifiers and stuff like that. All these various options. But we'll probably talk about that in the resources video once we go over how to use each resource. Now, we have a very important tab here, our country view, and it has all of these sub-tabs. The first one is our court. It gives our ruler. The number signifies how many monarch points our ruler gives our country per month. This is the easiest way to gain monarch points, is having a good ruler. As you can see here, our heir is actual trash. He is awful. He gives us no monarch points in anything, and he's infertile. So monarchs and heirs over time will develop traits, and these traits have various positive benefits or negative benefits, or I should say negative impacts. So we're not good at improving relations, but we are good at converting people, and we get an extra advisor. So normally when you pick advisors for your court, you have 3 options is the base, so you only get these 3. Since our king is well advised, we get an extra selection. It's an extra chance to get an advisor that's going to benefit us, which is, not bad. When we have our government overview, it shows what cultures are in our nation. Basically, accepted cultures is what you want, like all your provinces to be if possible. Non-accepted cultures have negative impacts on like unrest, X modifier, etc., etc. You can see all of it there. So provinces that are of an accepted or promoted culture are going to be a lot more useful to your kingdom than provinces that aren't. Now we have our diplomatic overview, and this is actually looking at Portugal since I clicked on them last. So I'll just go ahead and click back to Castile. We get to see how many diplomatic relations we have. So we're at 0 of a maximum of 4. If you go over your max number of diplomatic relations, you start losing 1 diplomatic power per month per amount that you're over. So if you have 5 of 4, you're going to be losing 1 diplo power per month. If you're at 6 of 4, you're going to lose 2, etc., etc. So you really want to keep it at 4, or if you have 5 or 6. There are various things that will increase or decrease how many relations you're allowed to have. Our diplomatic reputation is how well other countries view us diplomatically, basically. So higher diplomatic reputation means countries are more willing to form alliances with you, more willing to join your wars, less willing to join the enemies that you declare upon, and things like that. Then this is our speed at which we improve relations. Since our king isn't good at it, we get minus 20%, and then our prestige gives us plus 4%, so we have a total of minus 15%. This means that it's 15% slower to improve relations with other countries. You also have a ton of little things here. This is just kind of a more of an overview of this. So it shows our technology levels, our prestige, our stability, our ideas, our score, yada, yada, yada. This area is really not that important in my opinion. So moving on, our economic breakdown. This is the detailed economic breakdown, which you can get the overview of here. So basically the way we make money is taxes, production, trade, and if you have a province with gold, which we do, you gain extra gold from having a province with gold. The only bad thing about gold is it does give you inflation over time. That's kind of how to balance it out. We can also get money from our vassals if we have any, subsidies from other countries, spoils of war when you're looting other people's provinces, war reparations if we force people to pay us. Condottieri is like you're hiring your army out as mercenaries to go fight in other people's wars. Now here's a breakdown of your expenses. Advisors cost money, states cost money to run. If you have loans, you have to pay interest on those. Various diplomatic expenses right here, like if we're paying somebody war reparations or supporting rebels in another country, etc., etc. Fort maintenance is a huge cost, and as a new player, this is one of the best ways you can save money is by not running forts, because forts in this game are most optimally used in specific strategic locations, and since they're so expensive, you don't want to just build them everywhere, like can be tempting because you're like, oh, there's a fort here, the enemy has to take time sieging it, etc., etc. But they are really expensive. One of the biggest mistakes I think I made as a new player, because I like to play kind of defensively, is building a lot of forts, and I'm like, oh man, I have no money. Why do I have no money? And that's because I was paying out the wazoo for my forts. So these sliders you can use to pay or not pay various expenses. Colonial maintenance, you have to pay to support your colonists. If you don't pay your colonies are going to grow not at all or extremely slowly. Missionary maintenance, if you don't support your missionaries, they're not going to convert provinces very quickly. These are easy ways to temporarily save money in case you're in a bind. You know, it might not be imperative to convert that province right away. It might be better to save some of that money. Rooting out corruption, I touched on that a little bit earlier. I almost always like to keep the slider all the way up because I don't want my country to have corruption, but an easy way to save money in the short term. Army maintenance is another huge expense, as you can see. we could save, what, 3.02 ducats a month by not maintaining our army. The problem is, if you don't pay your army, you can see this morale bar, and we'll go over morale in the actual military part of things. It's a video for another time. If we don't pay our army, our morale drops. So if you're at war, you really want your army maintenance to be maxed outside of a few specific circumstances, because you don't want your army to have no morale. They're liable to get stack wiped, and that is not good. Great way to save money if you're at peace and don't want to drill your army. I'll cover army drilling in another video. Fleet maintenance, not a huge expense most of the time. Maybe if you're an extremely seafaring nation like Great Britain, it could be a pretty big expense. Generally, I like keeping it maximized, because if we drop our fleet maintenance, our fleet loses morale, of course, just like our armies did. But our light ships, which are used to protect, trade, or pirate other trade nodes, and that'll be covered in the trade video, they are significantly less effective at increasing our trade income. So overall, as Castile, we are gaining a bunch of money per month. That's awesome. These are more advanced options, like debasing your currency, taking loans. We'll probably go over those at another time. I'll quickly give an overview. Basically, take a 5-year loan of 123 ducats. The amount is based on your economy. So one more advanced technique is, if you start as a small country, you could take out a stack of loans, hire a bunch of mercenaries, take a bunch of land, and then once all of that land is cored and up and running, your economy is going to be much larger, which means those loans, maybe you took out a bunch of loans for like 8 ducats or 5 ducats or something. You took out 10 of them, right? Let's just say, for easy math, we had taken out 10 loans of 5 ducats each, and now we're at plus 5 ducats a month. We can pay off a loan once a month. So it's a very good way, once you're an experienced player, to be able to really start the ball rolling as a small nation, because the loans become easy to pay off over time. Debasing currency is basically you gain a bunch of money, but your corruption increases. So you gain money in the short term, but then you have to pay it off. Then there's also inflation, which increases the cost of everything. You can decrease inflation with admin points, and also advisors will decrease it over time. I think we had one of those advisors here. No, we didn't. I lied. But there's advisors that are like, reduces inflation by X amount per month. So moving on to trade. This trade is one of the most complicated things in EU4, in my opinion. This is basically an overview of how much we get how many ducats per month we get in trade, and the various modifiers to that. And yeah, I'll just have to cover all of this in a different video. Basically, the 30,000 foot overview is there's a bunch of trade nodes all over the map, and we can assign merchants to them to steer trade, collect from trade. We can assign ships to pirate other nodes, protect our own nodes. We have a bunch of different centers of trade, coastal centers of trade, yada yada yada. And so basically, to make money from trade, you want to make sure you pick up these centers of trade on the map, and you want to make sure you're steering trade to your home node and collecting in nodes that you have a lot of power in. So let's go back to the normal view. Technology. So monarch points are used to purchase technology once you have enough banked. You have admin points, diplo points, military points. Some people call it mana. Paper mana, bird mana, sword mana, whatever you want to call it. So once we save up 598 admin points, we are able to take admin tech 4. It's important as much as you can to try and keep your technology levels about equal. For example, you don't want to have Mil Tech 15 and Admin Tech 3, because that's going to give you a lot of corruption. One of the ways you gain corruption is unbalanced research. The other important thing is that as you're behind in technology, you get various penalties, But if you're ahead in technology, you get various bonuses. One important thing as a new player is, generally speaking, you only want to pick up technology when this number here is like between +5% and -5%. And your institution's tech penalty, let's just say rule of thumb, is less than 10%. If you take technology too early, you are way overpaying for it. And if you take it with a hefty institution tech penalty, again, you are way overpaying for it. Which means like maybe you would spend, I don't know, let's just say 750 admin points. But if you waited 10 or 15 more years to where you're not way ahead of time, maybe you only have to spend 500, which means you've effectively saved 200 points. There are cases, especially if you just got declared on or you're about to declare a close war, where spending those extra points to be way ahead of time in military tech could make the difference in those fights. We'll kind of go over the reasons why you would do that in the military video. Ideas. These slots for ideas are unlocked at various levels of admin technology. Ideas are really fun. It's a great way to customize your nation to your play style and what you're trying to do, what your overall goal is. So basically, once we get to admin 5, we get our first idea slot. There's a ton of different idea groups to pick from with a ton of different sub bonuses in them. And there's a thing where, like, let's say you take economic and quality. If you hover over quality, for example, there's all these like extra bonuses that you can pay for. So in terms of economic plus quality, the weapon quality standards is the very first one here. So you have to have economic ideas with quality ideas. It's going to cost you 1 military power per month, but whenever you have this enacted, your army gains 5% discipline. There's a ton of crazy combinations, a ton of great ways, like I said, to customize your nation. Basically, what's going to happen is you get admin 5, you get to pick anything you want, and then these subgroups are going to cost monarch points of that type. So everything in the military ideas, you can unlock all these little sub ideas over time by spending military power, diplo power, admin power. And then once you fully unlock all of these groups, you get another additional bonus. So there's like a lot going on here. I would recommend just reading over all of these, see what kind of stuff stands out to you. One of my favorite combinations, and that's the reason I use this example, is economic plus quality. Economic really helps you make money, lowers your development cost. We'll go over development probably in our resources video. Quality makes all your dudes better. And discipline, I think, is one of the most important combat stats. So if you have economic and quality all maxed out, you gain additional discipline from having quality unlocked. You gain additional discipline from that weapon quality standards. And it just really helps your army be effective man-to-man. So I would recommend reading over those. Additionally, this is why this topic's so complicated, is as you unlock ideas, you fill up this bar that's going to unlock unique ideas to your country. So since we're Castile, we start with Spanish ideas. So it says you need to unlock 3 more idea groups to unlock the next national idea. So let's just say that example I use, we pick up economic, we pick up quality, we max them all out. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus 7 more is 14. We would gain the first, 2? And almost the first 3 of our national ideas. So if we were to take that route that I talked about earlier, we'd have 5% discipline from having quality, we'd have 5% from economic and quality, and we'd have 5% more discipline from our national idea, the Reconquista. So that right there, that's 15% discipline. So you kind of want to also build around your country's national ideas. And finally, once you have unlocked all of these, you get an additional idea. For us, It's global settler increase, which is how quickly we can colonize places. Every country starts with traditions. Our Spanish traditions give us extra missionary. Normally countries start with 1, we get 2. And we get 15% morale. So every country starts with their own ideas. Then we have missions. This was changed, I think, in the patch that I'm just playing now. Last patch it was different, where you would get like specific missions tailored to the state of the game. And here the missions, I believe, are tailored to the country. So basically you need to discover the Caribbean before you can make a Caribbean colony, but it kind of like helps you have goals for your country to go for, and it can really give you stuff to do as a new player when you're not really sure what's going on or what you're supposed to be doing. So you could start looking at some of these like, hey, I should build to my force limit. How do I do that? Total army size at least 100% of the force limit. That's going to give me 5% morale and minus 5% land maintenance for 25 years. And then you get to do like this stuff, which gives you production, this stuff, yada, yada, yada. So it goes down. You just have to follow the arrows. So that can really help you figure out what to be working on as a new player if you're unsure. Now we have decisions and policies. So these policies are what I was pointing out on the ideas tab, where if we have economy and quality, we could enact a policy here, that weapon quality standards. It would be one of our 3 military policies that we're allowed to take. So those give you various benefits, and they cost monarch power each month. So national decisions, these are kind of like the broader goals for your country. One thing Castile can do is form Spain either militarily or diplomatically, and it gives you all of these qualifiers of how you can do that. So Spain has to not exist. Okay, that's true. We need admin tech 10. We don't have that yet, so we can't. We have to be independent. We have to be not nomads. We have to be at peace. And then we have to have cores on all of these provinces. As you can see, they're highlighted in pink. So if you want to form Spain, which we'll probably do that in this campaign eventually once we get to it, we need to make sure we conquer those provinces outlined in pink. You can see them highlight as I mouse over it. Diplomatically is a bit different, but same overarching end as we become Spain. And then we have all of these various acts and whatnot that you just have to read over those and see what they do. Now, I need to take a sip of water real quick. This video has been a lot more talking, I think, than I initially expected. So, stability and expansion. The measure of how stable, imagine that, your empire is. A number of things affect this. War exhaustion. People don't like being at war for a super long time. As you fight, as you take casualties, as your ports are blockaded, all of these things contribute to war exhaustion. As your war exhaustion goes up, your manpower recovers more slowly, the national unrest increases, things like that. So you can spend, I think it's admin points, if I remember correctly, to reduce your war exhaustion. It might be diplo points. We'll have to see. I don't remember exactly. I don't reduce war exhaustion very often. But you can reduce it by spending monarch power. This is one of the reasons I said monarch power is so important, is because it's used for so many different things. Generally speaking, as a new player, you probably don't want to click this button unless you're really, really high war exhaustion, because it does go down over time when you're not at war. Stability, +3 to -3. It gives you a breakdown here. Each level of positive stability has the following effects. Less unrest, more tax money. It becomes more and more costly to boost stability as you do it. Your missionaries get stronger. You naturally lose corruption over time. And, quite importantly, institutions spread to you more quickly. If you're at negative stability, your nation has more unrest. You're not good at with your interest, you're losing legitimacy, and you're losing caravan power, which is like inland trade power. We have states versus territories. We're allowed to have 15 states. We only have 7 right now. Basically, states are much more efficient than territories because if we go over here and look at our local autonomy, which we'll talk about that here in a minute. I might as well talk about it now. So local autonomy is the measure of how independent any given province is. And basically the simple way of putting it is if you're 25% independent, you're only getting 75% of the effect of that province, if that makes sense. So if they're 100% independent, that province might as well not be in your kingdom for the most part. If you're at 0% local autonomy, you're getting the full benefit of that province being part of your kingdom. Now, all of these are at 25%, I imagine, because the estates own most of them. Yeah, we'll go over estates in a minute. You can manually decrease local autonomy or increase it. Decreasing autonomy this way makes that province have a lot more unrest in it. But you gain more of an effect of it, and that unrest only lasts for a set period of time. So decreasing your autonomy can be a good way of gaining money, because the less autonomous a province is, the more it contributes to your kingdom, the more money you're going to get from it in the long run. Autonomy does decrease over time due to various reasons. So if you're having a lot of rebel issues, you might want to just let it tick down slowly over time rather than forcefully decrease it constantly. The reason states are so much more efficient than territories is because territories have an autonomy floor of 75%. They cannot go below 75% autonomy, which means you're only getting 25% of the value, essentially, of that province. Whereas a state can have an autonomy floor of 0, meaning you can get the full benefit of that province. So you're gonna, if you conquer a lot of land, you're gonna end up in a situation where you're gonna have more provinces than you can form states with. So it's important to pick which states you form. And if we look at a province overview, there's a thing over here for the state. It lists the name of that state and what provinces are part of it. So one of the important factors when you're conquering things is, let's say you're Portugal fighting Castile, which isn't realistic, but just go with it. You're going to get more of a benefit if you conquer these 4 provinces than if you pick up like just this one, and that one, and maybe that one. Because you could turn all of these into a new state. And you're going to pay a little bit of maintenance on a state, but as long as you make the proper sets of provinces into states, you're going to get way more out of it than you spend. The other thing that states can have are various edicts, which have various effects. And one of the most useful ones, in my opinion, is the advancement effort. So when you're trying to embrace an institution, which we'll talk about those here in a minute, you can enact the advancement effort, which will make your state cost more maintenance to run for a period of time, but it also makes the institution spread more quickly. Centralization effort's another good one if you want to just let that autonomy tick down versus forcing it down. You can enact this, and it gives you minus 0.03 autonomy per month. You can read all of those there. I won't go over each of them right now. We'll get back to this. Overextension, this is basically a measure of if you've taken too much land too quickly. And it ranges from 0 to, I guess, infinite. But once you go over 100%, like this says, you'll be meeting some nasty rebels regularly. And that's very true. If you go over 100%, you're going to get a lot of rebels everywhere. There's going to be popping up, climbing out of the woodworks. And they can be very annoying to deal with. So as a new player, I would recommend you always stay below 100%. 100% overextension when possible. The way you manage this is you spend admin power to core any provinces that you've taken. That makes it like a core of your kingdom and takes away that overextension. You have a breakdown of all the various rebels, your overall national unrest, and then this is for colonization. How far can you colonize? 160 right now. It'll go way up if you decide to go that route. There's a ton of modifiers to colonial range and how quickly your colonists are able to attract settlers. And there's a tons of modifiers to that if you go that route as well. You have a native policy. If we get into colonization, we'll go over those. Disasters. These are bad things that can happen to your kingdom. And basically you want to make sure you avoid these. So these can be unique to the nation, or they can be just overall, like I think everyone can have estate disasters and stuff like that. So for example, aristocratic coup, if the nobility has 100 or more influence, then they're going to try to take over the country. And that's bad for us because in this case we lose trade efficiency, national tax, and global trade power, which means we're going to be making way less money. Peasants' War, another one for Spain, is if you have manpower less than 25%, stability less than 0, then you get national unrest and stability. And basically there's ways of ending each of these. They're usually very costly for your nation, so it's best to avoid them. Religion, we talked about a little bit. We're Catholic. You can convert religions through various ways. We have our tolerance of heretics, heathens. So heretics are your same overall religion, like a religious group, I should say, but they're not your exact religion. So for example, Orthodox and Coptic faiths, they're still like Christian or whatever religious group they fall under, but they're not Catholic. So that's the true faith in Spain. That's our true faith. And then heathens are everybody else. They're like the totally not Christian people. You can pick up Defender of the Faith once you have the money and the prestige to do so. It can be useful, especially if you're fighting against like a lot of wars against people of other faiths, because you gain missionaries, you're losing war exhaustion, you're getting papal influence. The penalties are that it does increase how much it costs to take technology, which can be annoying. And if you're a defender of the faith, let's say we're the defender of the Catholics, and someone declares war on a Catholic country, we could be called in to help defend that country. So this is likely something we'll take eventually in this playthrough, because I'm planning on conquering a lot of North Africa to, throughout these playthroughs. And that extra missionary can really help us rack up our conversions quickly and increase our papal faith a lot, and we can use that for different benefits. Religious unity. So all of our provinces right now are Catholic. You want to keep your religious unity as high as possible, because the lower it is, the more negative of an impact it can have on your kingdom. So it can be important to convert provinces as you take them, and convert them quickly, hopefully. We have the papacy view, who currently controls the Pope. Being the Pope has different benefits. So, for example, you can call crusades and excommunicate people. That's pretty cool. But you can spend papal influence to try and become the Pope. So that's this button here. And the chance is basically on how much everyone has invested. So if you've invested the most, you're going to have a high % chance to become the Pope. Otherwise, you can spend it to increase your tax modifier, gain legitimacy, reduce inflation and interest, gain diplomatic reputation, get prestige. This is one of my favorite ones, is paying papal influence for stability. This way we don't have to spend our admin points on stability. Proclaim a holy war. So you can have the Pope tell the whole world, yes, the Spanish are conquering those evil Sunni or Shia or whatever religions here. I think they're all Sunni. You know, those evil Sunni dudes. And you get manpower recovery speed, which is very useful. You can also gain mercantilism, which in the long run can help you make a lot of money. So papal influence is definitely a nice thing to have as a Catholic. Here we have our military breakdown. These are the units we're using in our armies. There's a whole ton of units, and they have various pips of combat ability, and we'll go over those, what exactly they do in our military video. Usually I don't like to show outdated units because most of the time or all the time there's no use in using them for the most part. We have how much it costs to recruit them. It also shows you their maintenance per month. Notice that cavalry have a much higher maintenance per month per unit than infantry do. That's 0.21, that's 0.53. Another way of saving a lot of money, unless you are a country that has really good cavalry combat ability, is not running that much cavalry. We have our combat ability. Those are increased through various ideas. We have fire, shock, modifiers, and then how many of each type of unit we have. Everyone always has infantry, cavalry, and eventually artillery. We have our naval units, similar stuff there. That's how many cannons they have. The more cannons, the more stuff they shoot. Makes sense. How big their hull is has to do with like how much damage and stuff they can take, and then how many ships we have. Here we have a whole bunch of various modifiers to our military. One of the nicest things to have, in my opinion, is high professionalism. This is gained through drilling and various events. The reason I like high professionalism is because we gain siegeability, means we spend less time sieging things, and sieging things can be very costly in terms of manpower, and we do more damage to enemies. Additionally, we get some various benefits from having high professionalism. General cost minus 50% can be pretty sweet late game when you have to keep replacing a bunch of generals because they keep getting blown up. The other thing that you can do is slacken recruiting standards. So you lose professionalism, but can gain big chunks of manpower. That's great late game when you have a ton of professionalism and you're fighting a really long, grueling war against another big country. Maybe you mess up, you get stack wiped somewhere, you lose a lot of manpower. And you can lower your professionalism to gain huge chunks of manpower back. Because if you have 0 manpower, your armies cannot reinforce, and that can be very bad in a long war. We also have army tradition, navy tradition. This also gives you morale and siegeability and stuff. It's very nice to have very high army tradition, because the higher your army tradition, the more likely you are to get really, really good generals. And really good generals can have a huge impact on fights. We have a breakdown of our siege ability. We have our land force limits. We're at 21 of 28 right now. We start with a leader. Not all countries do. This button will let you mothball all forts very quickly, which can be useful if you have like 10, 12 forts in the late game, and you don't have to go instantly, or you can instantly mothball all of them rather than going one by one and mothballing them. Basically, a mothballed fort doesn't have a garrison, but you pay less money to keep it functional. So it's like the middle of the ground between totally destroying it and having it fully operational. The benefit of a fully operational fort is it does contribute to your army tradition. The bad news is it costs a lot of money, as I said earlier. So a lot of times out of war, especially if I'm struggling with money, I'll either delete like any obsolete forts that are in strategic locations, or I'll mothball the ones that are in the strategic locations if I know I'm not going to be fighting anytime soon. And then the opposite button, activate all forts. And usually I keep this checked, automatically raise maintenance during war, which means if over here on our slider we had our maintenance all the way down and all of our forts mothballed, it would automatically do all of that for us so that we don't forget. This tab, if we had any subjects, we would be able to click that and interact with them. We can give them provinces, give them money, do bad things like make them pay us more. I say bad things. We can make them pay us more, but that's going to increase how much they want to rebel against us. It also will show you like a breakdown. How much manpower do they have? How much money do they have? What is their liberty desire, which is like how likely are they to try to break free, declare a revolution. So we'll probably pick up a subject at some point in this and go over that. Estates. So not every country has the same exact estates, but for us, we have the burghers, which are the merchants, the clergy, the church dudes, and nobility, you know, the elite stuck-up dudes that want to remain in power. There's a measure of how loyal they are, as well as how much influence they have. Generally speaking, you don't want any of the influence to be over 80%. That's kind of the rule of thumb that I have. There's also what percentage of the land do they currently have, and each one has like an amount of land that they expect to have. And it's a measure of development, not a measure of like total square mileage. There are various ways of interacting with your estates. So they can do good things for you. Like we can say, hey, we need some more money, merchants. Y'all are freaking rich. Give us some money. So they'll lose loyalty, but we're going to gain some money. And you can use it once every 10 years, only when their loyalty is 30 or higher, and it's going to cost them 10 loyalty. You can say, hey, give me that Diplo power. And this is one of the most useful things because, as I've said before, monarch points are extremely valuable. So they're going to lose 20 loyalty for it, which would put them at 30, which we don't want, because if it's below, I think, 40, you start getting penalties. Yeah, right there. If it's below 40, you're going to get minus trade efficiency and plus development cost, and it breaks down there. So keeping their loyalty high is good, but sometimes you're going to need those Diplo points, you're going to need that money, whatever. To increase their loyalty, you can do things like granting monopoly charters. You can do it once every 20 years. It gives them 10 influence and 15 loyalty. So a lot of times at the beginning of videos, you'll see people do stuff like grant monopoly charters, demand diplomatic support. They will net plus 10 influence and only minus 5 loyalty. If you use both of those concurrently, you can do both of them. Look at that, once every 20 years. You can also grant admiralships, recruit ministers, and draft ships, where this says start construction of 5 early carrack for 0% of the cost and 50% of the time, which means if you're really needing some ships, they can help you get them quickly. Grant admiralship is very useful early on, just like in the nobility. Grant generalship is very useful until your army tradition is very high, because this gives you a general with 40 tradition. Well, we only have 8 tradition. So this general, like 99 to 100% of the time, is going to be way better than any general that we recruit. And if we were to recruit a general, it's going to cost us 50 military power, whereas this doesn't cost us any military power. But if we click this button right now, that'd be bad, because then the nobility would be at 100% influence, which was one of our disasters. So you do want to be careful with managing the influence. You don't want it super high, because then events can pop up that are like, all right, you have to lose like 10,000 ducats, or give the nobility 10% influence. If you're already 80-90% influence, you're basically going to have to lose all that money. So all of these have various interactions, and you can just read over them on your own time, and we'll use some of them as we go on. So the final 2 things I want to do before we wrap up this video is the overview of all of these little flags. This kind of, it tells you when you need to do things and when you can do things. So if it's a red flag, you probably want to get it taken care of. So we're going to want to assign some rivals, which we'll look at that in our next video. We can recruit advisors. So this, we don't have to have advisors, but it does give us extra monarch points per month, depending on how skilled the advisor is. So that's a good thing to do when you have the money. A big mistake I used to make as a new player is I was like, oh, I always want to have advisors because they're good and stuff. But they can be very, very expensive, especially later on. Like this guy and this guy are 4 ducats a month. We're only making 5.83. So that's like most of our income. This lets you know when our truce is going to expire. You want to keep an eye on this, especially if it's a country that you're going to want to fight. Spoiler alert, we're going to want to fight Granada. We can build province improvements. I'll go over buildings probably in another video when we're talking about how to manage your provinces. Basically, buildings cost money, give you various benefits. We have a list of countries with disputed successions, more of a middle/advanced mechanic. Basically what this can let us do is, if we are very clever and calculated, we can form marriages with these countries, and then when their ruler dies, we can say, hey, you know, we're married to you guys, you're married to us, we're the same family, why don't you just become our junior partner? Conversely, we could become someone else's junior partner. But this can be an insane way of getting a ridiculous amount of power very quickly. So like sometimes I've even seen like England and France as partners, or like a common one could be Austria and Hungary as partners. The most common one you're going to see a lot of the time is Poland and Lithuania are partners. And so basically what that means is if you are the ruling partner, let's just look at Denmark, because they always start with 2 junior partners, Sweden and Norway. So Denmark essentially rules Norway and Sweden. They can't like directly influence the governments of Norway and Sweden per se, but if anyone declares on Sweden or Norway or Denmark, they all fight together all the time. Whereas in an alliance, you can refuse a call to arms. You get penalties for doing so, but you don't have to fight alongside somebody. But in terms of this union, you have to. And we can select naval doctrines, which I believe are a new thing. We can go over that in a different video, because this one's already getting pretty long. Finally, we have our production interface. This is a very useful thing that you'll want to get familiar with. It is basically an easy way to build whatever you want quickly. So let's say I want to make some land units. We can click here and then just go boom, 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 and recruit stuff. I want to build ships. Same thing. Click where you want to build it. You want to make stuff core, just click down the list. Send missionaries to places. It'll tell you how much time it's going to take, what current religion it is, and the name of the province. Autonomy. There's only one place that we could decrease autonomy in, but it's only 2% autonomous. We can't force it below, because it's below 10%. Culture, like I was saying earlier, if a culture is either not accepted or promoted, it's going to have negative impacts. This, you can quickly promote or change the culture to one that you want it to be. It does cost an amount of Diplo points, and it takes a certain amount of time to convert. Building buildings quickly, raising development quickly, which we'll go over that in another video. Managing estates quickly, you can just see like a quick overview of everything in terms of loyalty, influence, and land, and see which estates own which provinces. Diplomacy, if you really don't want to micromanage your diplomats, you can say, hey, I'm going to be at peace for like 10 years, go and improve our reputation with countries that are next to us, and the computer will just take care of it for you. I'll go ahead and click those off though. And exploiting development, which is the opposite of developing, where like we could decrease the development in this place, I don't know how to pronounce that, but we instantly gain some money. So like maybe if you know a province is going to get taken from you in a war, you can quickly exploit all the development. That way if you can't retake it, the computer has a crappy province and you've gotten at least something out of it. Generally speaking, as a new player, I would probably shy away from this, because in the long run, we're going to get way more than 450 manpower or 21 ducats over this province, like out of that province over the course of the game. Alright, and actually, finally, very last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is all the different map modes. There are like a bajillion different map modes. I would recommend you looking over them and what they show. The ones I would absolutely always have is terrain, because terrain is very important for combat in this game. This is a very strategic game, not necessarily a very tactical game. The outcome of fights is pretty much decided before the fight starts, outside of some just absolutely atrocious RNG. But very important when you're fighting to keep terrain in mind. You don't want to be crossing rivers. You don't want to be fighting into hills, forests, and mountains. Political, this is the one you'll probably be on most of the time because it shows you who owns what. Trade, another very important one. You can plan on what provinces do you want to take, early on in a war, as well as it'll help you manage your trade to make money. Then another nice one would be diplomacy. You can see who's your allies, who are your subjects, etc., etc. Religion, kind of useful. I like having it. The other one that I would always have would be institutions. So once institutions start popping up, they're going to have like a home that they pop up in, and they're going to spread from there. And so it's a good way to keep an eye on how soon are you able to embrace an institution. All right. I think that's enough for this video. It was probably super long and not entirely thrilling because it was just a ton of like really boring UI information, but it's really important to start being able to read the UI. It's kind of like the Matrix, where you have like all this stuff coming out and you have so much information presented to you that you have to look over and make decisions on, and it can be really overwhelming as a new player. So explore the UI and get used to clicking through everything, know where to find stuff, and just start getting a good appreciation for how they present this information to you. And that will finally be the conclusion of this first beginner's guide video. Please let me know what topics you'd like me to cover. The next 2 videos are most likely going to cover resource and resource management. And I'm definitely going to do one on how to properly fight wars, because that's a very difficult thing for a new player to understand, because it's not like in Civilization where it's like pretty transparent. In Civ, it pretty much tells you how the fight's going to go before you engage. Whereas in EU4, you're just kind of like, oh, I don't know. I've got 10,000 dudes, he has 8,000 dudes, I should probably win, right? Well, not if he has a 2 or 3 star general, you have a 1 star general or no general. If he's in the hills or the mountains and you're crossing a river, there's tons of factors that can go into it, and it's not really very clear. But yeah, let me know what other topics you want me to cover. I'm planning on doing a pretty long beginner's guide because I want you guys to fall in love with this game like I did once I started appreciating the depth and just how complex it is and everything that's going on. So take care. I'll see you in the next video. And if you want to see me playing the game a little bit, check out my series where I'm striving to reform the Kingdom of Jerusalem, starting as Provence. Thanks, and have a good day.